explored the question of values and norms and ideologies, the fact that ideas have histories and are made in particular places, particular paradigms, particular ways of thinking about the world. In this sequence, I want to go a little bit further and explore this idea of ideas that are produced in particular places by particular people. So Christian, this ecosystem service idea brings together a whole variety of different forms of knowledge, from environmentalists, ecologists, economists. Somehow everyone seems to find this is going to work. So can you tell us a little bit about why the success of this idea?
It's a really good question. On the one hand, I think one aspect is that it's a boundary object, right? Because it is the kind of a term that seems to, everybody can see themselves in it, and therefore it works for them, and it's plastic enough that people can kind of define it slightly differently depending on their approach. But it wouldn't work as a boundary object if you had it at another point in history. We have to talk kind of about the 1990s and the 2000s. If this had appeared in 1950, I don't think the boundary object would have worked. And I think the reasons for its success, or even the invention of the two words put together at that moment, has to do with that 1990s moment of market triumphalism, where the Soviet Union had fallen, and essentially the market, the free market, was seen as the main sort of motor for an efficient, functioning society. And so already that idea of a market as a potential solution for environmental problems could gain a purchase among people who are more concerned with biology, more concerned with ecology.
It kind of fit in with the
It fit in, that's right.
Thinking. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, there's also the kind of spirit in terms of environmental management was this idea of ecological modernization, right? Instead of the 1970s environmentalism, where you wanted the state to come in and make more rules to make things, to save the forests, to clean the air, to clean the water. By the 1990s, the idea was that, well, maybe the commerce and industry and capitalism had caused the problems, but it's not going to be the state that's going to solve the problems. It's by doing it better. It's by doing modern economies, but in a greener way, that would solve the problems.
So you enrolled capitalism to solve the problems.
To solve its own problems.
Capitalism has created.
That's right. Okay, there's a little irony in there, but we can live with that. But you can imagine that this idea had kind of taken hold among major policy institutions. The Brundtland Report to begin with, as well as a number of later reports that kind of, the idea was that the state plays a role, but not the main role. You enroll market actors, you enroll private civil society actors, and so on, all together in managing the environment and doing things better, but not through this top-down 1970s dirigism kind of approach. So I think for that reason there was something in the water in the late 90s that allowed this cross-fertilization, that opened the space for the boundary object.
Right. And then in practice, I mean, who are we talking about? Who got interested in this idea then? Who brought the idea to the table?
I think the two names that come up the most often are based on two publications that came out in 1997. Gretchen Daly at Stanford University, and Robert Costanza, an ecological economist. And they both separately, and also with co-authored publications, also presented this idea in very high-profile books and articles. I think they represent, and if you follow the idea in the next few years, they represent a sort of a network that, with the research that I've done with my colleagues, you can see a repetitive number of certain individuals, certain institutions that seem to be at the center of the promotion and the kind of mainstreaming of the idea. And there are people that have links to Stanford in particular, Stanford University, which has long been a center for conservation biology with quite some importance. Paul Ehrlich has been there for 40 years or so, and Harold Mooney is there. There's also people like Walter Reed, who have long experience in international environmental management. So it has people with a lot of reputation, a lot of power, and connections. And networks. And networks. Right. And another pole might be Florida, or at least people who had been together at Florida, University of Florida, sort of at the origins of systems ecology, Odom and C.S. Holling, and some of their students. Robert Costanza, for instance, was a student of C.S. Holling, and they had networks with other places, but Stockholm comes up quite important in this, with the Bejer Institute for Ecological Economics, as well as the Resilience Center, in which some of these other actors are also involved. But these were places that very much seem to have brought people together with different funding and different moments to create these kind of workshops that bring people together, build these networks. But the thing that holds them together is they seem to be people that often had tight networks, right? That they had connections to places of power, and were able to not only create ideas, but also make them
so in a sense have the
roll.
social capital to kind of to get them out there.
It's
not just a good idea that just happened.
Right.
It also that it was kind of actively pushed and promoted and linked up in all these different places.
It came the kind of the talking of biologists to economists came at a moment where I think elements in both fields saw the need to move things further than they had already been. The biologists, saw this opportunity to perhaps further the conservation biology agenda and get more, basically, means in order to implement forest conservation or wetland conservation or other things that were dear to their hearts. At the same time as meeting with a number of economists, ecological economists as well as environmental economists, who were seeking to basically find alternative modes or alternative tools to take care of the externalities of our economy today.
So in a sense, this kind of idea suited both of these quite unusual partners.
That's right.
That have come together around this idea.
That's right. That's right.
So in a sense, a story here which is an idea in a particular time, which suited itself to that, and in a sense also the child of this time.
That's right. And one thing that was really succeeded in kind of bringing it to the masses, right, or bringing the idea to its global stage, was the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which came out in about 2005, in which many of these actors played a key role. If you look at the lists of key authors, of editors, of people who are cited in those documents, this is a document like those IPCC reports we hear about the climate every 4 or 5 years. The MEA, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, took place once, but it's 1,000 scientists who were brought together through co-writing reports to basically, at the end of the second millennium, to take a stock of what's going on with the environment and with biodiversity and so on. And Ecosystem Services has a pride of place in those. I mean, it's like 5 or 6 tomes of 1,000 pages of reports. Ecosystem Services is all the way through those reports. That's where the concept was really promoted into the mainstream. And you see the same names, Harold Mooney. You see the same people cited all the time, and they played a key role.
So in a sense, when we look back and we say Millennium Ecosystem Assessment is the document that created it, we mustn't forget that before there was all these networks and all this mobilization that led to that.
And even 1997, there's a history before those. I mean, the paper by Costanza was in Nature, but the idea had been developing before that, certainly. But we'd have to ask him. I don't know those details.
Right. Thank you.
Yes.